Welcome to part 2. Let's waffle. Looking at the round 9 fixtures, I think we're up to, John. It's hard to keep up to date with all these buys and teams playing odd amount of matches. South Fremantle, just when you think that they're back in form, there's a couple of injuries that seem to bring them back to the field a little bit, and you've got some mail on some sore boys down at the port.
Yeah, well, we know Jamie Graham's in a terrible situation with his knee injury last week, or just over a week ago, and
had an operation, I think, on Friday afternoon.
Friday. I understand that only one ligament in that knee was not affected by the tear or the injury, so it's one of the worst knee injuries in football history. Probably his chances of playing again are highly limited. But more than that, obviously, Toby McGrath went down in the game against West Perth. He had an Achilles injury, and they're not great things to try and get over. Paul Magumba did an ankle. Ryan Murphy's got a broken foot. Paul Hazelby's got a quad injury. A lot of the real senior players are in trouble at the moment, and I think they've got a tough run coming up. Claremont, East Fremantle and Swans in 3 of the next 4 games, and that could really be quite defining for their season. I think they've got 14 players who they consider first choice out of action, and that includes Sam Hunt and Scott Thornton, who were forced to retire earlier in the season because of their injuries. So South have got a big job ahead of them in the next month just to get back on track, I think, and they really got exposed by West Perth. Their midfield is old, it's slow, it's reactive, and West Perth really sliced them to bits, and so South have got a fair bit of work to do. Like East Perth, I reckon, they've just been very competitive for quite a while, and maybe that just their ageing legs are starting to hurt them now. But that run of injuries is really the thing that's cruelled them.
It's amazing the doom and gloom was about Swan Districts a couple of weeks ago. We were just about ready to have them buried in the ground, and they're in 4th spot at the moment, John.
Well, I guess the expectation was that they were underperforming. They're off to that 4-0 loss start. Ashley Hansen coming back slowly. Some of their blokes not really firing. It's a difference between good players out of form or waiting to find their form, and your good players being sitting in the grandstand with their knees up in plaster. So I think Swans will be competitive. They'll be around the mark. I mean, just about everyone picked them to play in finals. I think they'll be very stiff not to play in finals, but they couldn't afford too many hiccups, I wouldn't have thought, because of that poor start. But they're starting to play some pretty imposing footy, beating Perth, Peel and East Perth. They're the 3 least qualified sides in the comp, so they haven't beaten any of the big ones for a while, but you can only play who you're up against, and they've shown some good signs. And Ash Hansen, 8 goals last week, that's a real good sign for them.
Now, John, just on a lighter note, it was remiss of me not to say where we are today, because we do move around the league, going to different venues and different facilities. We're in the Wim Rosbender studio today.
Gosh, Wim Rosbender. Well, was he one of those Perth old fellas who were there at the game at Lane on Saturday for their 500th home game?
He could well have been. A very interesting situation about Lane, or should I say Brown Stadium. I think they're claiming that it's 52 years, or 50 years exactly, actually, there. 2 years were at the WAFL, yeah. So they were there in 59, and it's been 2 years, so that then adds up to the 50. I'm glad I had all my fingers and toes available.
Just one thing about Perth. I watched the ABC match during the week. You reckon that they could do some research, Ross? They had, they have the ins and outs for Perth. Frank Agostino was an in for Perth. Well, Frank Agostino retired about 6 weeks ago, and you reckon that it wouldn't have been all that hard to work out that he's no longer going around. But they still had him in there as an in for Perth.
Can walk back into the East Perth club rooms now. He's no longer.
No, he can't walk back in. He
lives back in. That's very good. Now, speaking of crowds, John, not a good week. Probably a clear factor in poor crowds in the waffle this week was the AFL match going up live against the 2 o'clock start. We had 5 games of WA football finishing within about 15 minutes of each other on Saturday. It was a very busy afternoon. 500 people was the approximation down at East Fremantle Oval. Now, when you take into account, as we discussed earlier, kids, passers, umpires, officials, you're probably looking at about 50 paid customers on the day, and probably, as you say, a loss for East Fremantle on the day.
I'm interested to see how they're going to allocate the Colts crowd. Now, there was a Colts crowd of about 52 AFL spotters at Subiaco Oval for the three Colts matches.
It's an arbitrary 350, isn't it? Don't they just add 350?
I thought it was 450. 300 for Colts, 150 for reserve. So,
but that's just added on, regardless of whether there's 5 people there or 1,000.
I think the crowd that was not there is going to be greater than the crowd that was there.
Yes.
I mean, it is remarkable. I mean, East Freo and Peel are the two least followed teams in the competition. Remarkable for East Freo, 29 premierships. So,
well, that's
the most successful club going around.
There's a lot of talk about the success of East Fremantle, and indeed they are going through their longest premiership drought at the moment. But infrastructure is not too good down at East Fremantle either. So, and let's say they've had a lot of players drafted over the last 20 years, and there's been a lot of draft money come in. I don't think it's been spent on spectator amenities as well. So, I suppose the other argument is, why would you want to go to that?
Well, yeah, I mean, you want to watch the footy, but it's not a great place to go. And I mean, they've been negotiating with East Fremantle Council for about 37 years, I think, for a redevelopment. Interesting, Hayden Raitt, the South Fremantle president at the West Perth lunch the other day, said South would welcome East Fremantle back to Freo Oval if they wanted to have a ground sharing arrangement. Now, that's been off the agenda for a few years, but maybe that does come back on again. And he certainly said the offer is open for Foundation Day derbies to be played at South Fremantle and a split of the gate.
That's where the WAFL need to take some initiative and not have clubs trying to negotiate amongst themselves. It's clubs' responsibility to look after clubs' backyard, not to look after the competition as a whole. And I think by allowing clubs to have that, well, we're not going to cooperate here syndrome, I think that's where the WAFL really need to stand down on it.
Yeah, well, I mean, East Fremantle,
if anyone's listening.
500 people at East Fremantle. I mean, the night footy should be the way to go. It seems to have been tried and abandoned as being too hard, which is disappointing when you see in the Sandful that 8, 9, 10,000 people going to the parade or Adelaide Oval to watch Sandful games on Friday nights.
How many are going to pop into maybe Adelaide Oval too, with a few Sandful games played there on a Friday night after the redevelopment of that ground?
Look, it is remarkable. I mean, the lights at Leederville and the lights at Fremantle Oval are pretty ordinary. It's we know. You hate covering Fremantle Oval night games because you can't see the far side of the ground, so that's one issue. But as far as events go, it's fantastic. You can go to Freo, you have a pasta and a beer and a bite and a coffee, and go to the footy, or you go to the footy first and go out for dinner later. I am flabbergasted that that's something that hasn't been developed better, but the WAFL doesn't have a promotions arm, so it's probably no surprise it doesn't get pushed along.
Well, particularly interesting when Channel 7 do delay the Friday night football, so the majority of people can't see it until 8:30 anyway, so there is that window of opportunity. Do they need to look further outside the square, John? And some of the issues we looked at earlier was, the games need to be moved to 11:30 in the morning to avoid an AFL clash, particularly if Eagles or Dockers are going to play a 2 o'clock Saturday afternoon game. Do we need to play Colts later? Do we need to play them at night? Does the WAFL need to be more flexible, taking into account that they do need a 2:15 game for ABC TV, but you do only need one game for that?
Look, I think one thing that's happened, crowds have stabilised, and we've been on an upward pattern for about a decade. This is the first year, I think, in that 10 years that crowds haven't continued to grow, so maybe it's reached a natural peak and it's plateauing a bit. One of the strengths, I think, is that you know that that footy is on at 2:15 on Saturday afternoon. But equally, I think this year it has been more evident than any other year in recent times that going live against AFL matches on TV are having an impact on crowds. I mean, the West Perth South game, 1 versus 3, home grade at West Perth with who are absolutely flying, best start in over a century. They could only get 2,000 people along to the game, and I think Joondalup is one of the best places to actually watch footy. You can sit on the banks with your kids, or you can't sit in the stand because they've got a couple of security guards there who move people on, including John Worsfold, famously last year, which was very entertaining.
Wouldn't want to sit up there with some of the West Perthies either, would you?
Yeah. Well, there's the human siren, of course, and he's going nicely at the moment. I think he's just got to go off the pace a little bit, because he's going to have a lot of cheering to do at the end of the year. Yeah, I think he might just have. He's had a very big pre-season. Maybe it's time for a month or two, just off the back at 80%. But 2,000 people turned up to Joondalup, perfect conditions for a great game. It is having an impact. I can see real benefits in maintaining the stability of 2:15 Saturday afternoon footy, but equally we've got to recognise that there is an impact. What's the core following? Is the core for clubs 1,000 or 1,500 people? If that, you know, it's not going to go much below that. But equally, I think 2,000 people for a great game of footy is very disappointing, and perhaps something that needs to be addressed if it can be. Promotion is the key, though, Ross. The WAFL does not promote football, and I think and it is absolutely infuriating for us who actually cover footy that the WAFL does absolutely nothing to promote it. And I think it's about time they had a good hard look at themselves and tried to do something.
Well, the WA Football Commission has become so compartmentalised that the WAFL is just a little part of the overall scheme, and I think it's been treated that way over the last 5 or 6 years in its marketing and promotion. And I think it's time that the WAFL had its own standalone marketers and promoters whose job is solely to sell WAFL, not sell women's football, junior football, recreational football, which seems to be getting a massive AFL fund injection, which is absolutely ridiculous.
Which was at a school this week. Big news about that, wasn't it?
Well, I mean, WAFL's been around for 125 years, continues to produce players for AFL system, and we're worrying about glorified touch football. Anyway, moving on, we better rush through these, John. The games this weekend.
What about one-touch football? Chad Jones. Ross, as I said, I watched the replay of the game. I don't think I've ever seen him attack the ball as strongly and as vigorously as he did. Kicked 8 goals. I mean, Perth got torn to bits by the Tigers, and but awesome signs for Claremont. If Chad Jones is going to play like that, that's going to straighten them up. That's going to stop them fiddling around as they do. The handball, 220 odd handballs, I think, in the Perth game, which is about that's a massive number of opportunities to lose the ball. Obviously, it's part of their game plan. Chad Jones, very imposing, and I reckon that there'll be a lot of clubs very concerned watching him in action, going about it like that.
Games this week, round 9, all 2:15 on Saturday afternoon after that discussion. Peel versus East Perth, Bendigo Bank Stadium.
Well, you'd almost get on Peel, because East Perth are only just going. We know that there's some player disharmony at East Perth. I think that Trevor Williams has got Peel going okay. They're competitive in first halves, as we said. I reckon they might just go a bit deeper, and they might get their first points on the board this week. Yeah,
I'm jumping on Peel because East Perth have been too ordinary for me to continue to support them on the tipping chart. Swan Districts versus Subiaco at Steel Blue Oval, Bassendean.
Yeah, Swans at home. Big game for Subi though, isn't it? They've been very competitive. I think they've lost their 4 games by about 4 or 5 goals in total. They've been competitive. They've been pretty good, Subi. They might lose Jack Anthony this week, who's been pretty good for them and one of their regular conduits to goal. I think Swans are just back on track, and we should see them getting better and better in the weeks to come.
Well, that's 2 for 2 for us, because I'm sticking with Swans. Claremont East Sherman at Claremont Oval. We'll just pick Claremont and move on.
Yeah, could be ugly.
How many people will be there?
16.
Perth versus West Perth at Browns Stadium.
Yeah, West Perth going beautifully. They'll be 8-0, and they're only 1 short of their record start to a season, which was also a premiership year in 1891.
I think I was around to see that one.
Yeah.
So I'm sticking with West Perth too, and South Fremantle we won't pick because they've got the bye. They can have a week off to rest some sore bodies.
Yeah, it couldn't have come at a better time for them too, poor old South. And then they had that very tough run after that. So yeah, things looking tough for the next month for the Bullies.
Well, let's waffle for round 9. Thanks for staying with us, and make sure you stick with the west.com.au for all your waffle action.